you have to?
There we go. Okay.
So we are basically asking for consent to use your voice in any of the pictures and videos that you give to us to publish with the BLC Field School. Any of this information is public, and it'll also be stored in the UWM archives. But it's just stating that there are spaces right here on the consent form that you could pull out any information that you don't feel comfortable with sharing. And there's also numbers that you can contact if one day you decide that you don't want this information out in the public. It's also stating that there are no risks to being involved with this interview. The only risk is that your name will be associated with anything that we publish that you said. And there are also no benefits except for the fact that you'll be contributing to the knowledge and perception of the Sherman Park neighborhood. So, yeah, do you understand the terms and conditions, and do you agree?
Yes, I agree and I understand.
Okay, good. So we'll just get started with the interview. Hi, my name is Tiana Cooksey. I am a student at UWM with the BOC Field School. I'm here with Kelly Sinoke and Costin.
Tiksinski.
Yep. And I'm interviewing
Mabel Lamb.
on June 13th, 2018 at 3:18 p.m. So I already explained the consent form to you, and you said you understood and you agreed. So yeah, my first question is I want you to just describe yourself. Tell me your name, your age, where you grew up, and just if you would like to say your age, it kind of helps with us, researchers. But anything you can just describe away.
Okay. My name is Mabel Lamb. I am 50-something years old. I am a native of Milwaukee. I was born and raised here. I'm a product of Milwaukee Public Schools and a graduate of UW Milwaukee. I grew up in the Rufus King neighborhood. When I got older, I decided I would purchase a home, and I decided to purchase a home here in Sherman Park.
Okay, so what did you study at UWM?
Communications. I have a BA in communication.
Mm-hmm. And then where did you go to high school?
Milwaukee Tech.
Milwaukee Tech. Cool. And then could you tell me about the process that, kind of like the journey that led up to you purchasing your own home and why you made that decision?
Why did I purchase my own home? I decided I didn't want to live with my parents. I got older. I grew up. I decided I needed a space of my own. I was raising a child at that time. And I chose Sherman Park because I love the housing stock in the neighborhood, and I love the area that I decided to purchase the home in.
And when did you move into the neighborhood?
In 2000.
So have you ever rented before, or did you just jump right into home ownership?
I've lived in other states. So when I lived in Minnesota, I rented. I lived there for a couple years. I lived in Minneapolis, and I was a renter and also a student at the University of Minnesota. I got married. I moved to Detroit. I rented while I was in Detroit. And once I came back to Milwaukee, it was time to purchase a home.
And could you describe what the differences are between renting and home ownership in your experience?
Renting and home ownership. Okay. So as I made the journey into home ownership, one of the things I realized is I was renting, I was just paying rent, and that I would get nothing once I left. No tax benefits, no pride in making this home beautiful or any of that. So that's when I decided it was just kind of time to buy a home. And then I just think purchasing a home also gives you some stability and some pride in making your space your own. And so that's what I did. And I think some of it too, I chose to purchase a duplex rather than a single family home. I was divorced with a small child, and I thought it would be beneficial that I would have additional income paying the mortgage.
And could you maybe describe what it was like how you felt about the house that you lived in when you rented, in regards to the ownership that you took in the house and how you displayed that?
I guess I'm confused with the
So
question.
a lot of the interviews that we had in the past, people have talked about the difference between home ownership and renters, and even being able to visually see who rents and who owns by how they take care of the house and how it looks visually. So I just want to know, from a renter perspective, you did mention purchasing a home and becoming an owner gave you more stability, and it also gave you an opportunity to be more prideful for the work that you put into the house. So did that change? I guess I'm more interested in, was it a mental thing? I own this house, so now I have to, this is my responsibility? What was the difference in that responsibility?
Well, I grew up in a house. My parents have been married for 61 years. They still live in the same house. So I've watched over the years my parents take care of the home. And in addition to that, they also made investments in, purchasing other properties. And that was, again, part of the reason why I decided I would purchase a home as well. And gaining that stability and having that additional income from having a duplex, that's what probably gave me more stability financially. So, did that answer the question?
Yeah, it
Okay.
definitely did.
Okay.
So now I kind of want to look at your idea of the neighborhood and your position in the neighborhood. Could you just describe what that is?
My position, my job.
What do you do in a neighborhood?
What do I?
Outside of just living, I know you work in the neighborhood. What type of work do you do?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm the executive director of Sherman Park Community Association. I started that position April 30th of this year. As a resident of Sherman Park, again, I purchased my first house in 2000, and I moved from one area of Sherman Park to another area of Sherman Park. And then again, buying another duplex. So one of the things that I have been doing is engaging more with the residents of Sherman Park to get some ideas of what they want out of the neighborhood and also where they would like to see our neighborhood go. I'm an avid gardener, so I take pride in putting a lot of flowers and making my house beautiful, stand out. I think that's it.
So you mentioned you look at the residents and what they want and what they visualize the neighborhood being in the future. Could you maybe describe, first I want to know why you moved from one place in Sherman Park to another?
Why did I move from one place to another? Without a lot of description, just moved on Sherman. I like the houses, the historic homes on Sherman. So the house that I originally purchased was built in 1954. The house that I'm currently in was built in 1923. so the architecture is completely different. The house is larger. Um, and I like the area. I like the area I moved in on Sherman Boulevard.
What do you like about the area?
I like the neighbors. I love the historic homes. That was the big attraction for me.
And when you do the work that you do, when you ask people what they want and what they want to see, what are the responses that you get?
It depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to someone that has been in their home, say 20 plus years, most times people are looking, especially people who are kind of aging in place, they want the neighborhood to be safe. That's like the number one response.
And how does your organization or this association work towards that goal?
Well, we do a number of things. One, we have in Sherman Park, we have a neighborhood patrol in a particular area of Sherman Park. We also have a lot of neighborhood groups, block clubs that also try to provide information for the residents, whether it's crime statistics, the crime trends, things like that, so that people are aware and knowledgeable. In addition to that, we provide and act as a resource for residents if they're having problems. Say maybe it's a rowdy neighbor next door or they're having incidents in their neighborhood, then we try to be a resource for the neighbors. And then in addition to that, we do try to work with the Department of Neighborhood Services and Milwaukee Police Department in resolving some issues for people.
And what has it been like in the community the years that you've lived here? What has it transitioned at all? And if so, what was that like?
Well, certain areas of Sherman Park there's more homeowners, and in certain areas of Sherman Park, there's more rentals. I think one of the trends that has taken place is that a lot of investors have targeted Sherman Park as a place to invest, which is a problem, and it could be a good situation. It depends on how the person, the investor, the landlord decides to take care of the property, and also when they are selecting tenants, the tenant screening. So we have homes that are inhabited, but sometimes it's not the best tenant situation for the neighborhood.
Could you describe a little bit more about that? Like what it would look like to be not a bad, but like an unwanted situation, maybe?
Unwanted as in?
Or it's not the best situation?
Well, I mean, I could list a number of things. When people are violating ordinances of the city, I think oftentimes people need to know how to be good neighbors. What does that mean? What does that look like? And unfortunately, some people just don't know. They don't realize what that means. If that means turning your music down at a reasonable time in the neighborhood, if it means cutting your grass, taking care of your property, being accountable and responsible for your children. So those are things that could sometimes be a bad situation.
And in those situations, do you see the neighborhood or any of the organizations in the neighborhood work to maybe work with those individuals? Or is it just a temporary situation that the residents just deal with?
Well, it depends. It depends on the resident of the neighborhood. And in saying that, it's going to depend on if the person is, and I don't want to say wants to deal with the battle, but um, sometimes people are afraid or they may resist calling the city of Milwaukee for the Department of Neighborhood Services and asking for help. I think oftentimes citizens are a little apprehensive because they think that there's gonna be some retaliation in regards to if they called on a house that maybe there was some unwanted situation, because that happens.
So how do you feel about the safety of the neighborhood?
I feel safe in the neighborhood.
Could you describe kind of like a daily routine that you would go through? And if so, we kind of want to visualize what it's like to live in this neighborhood. So if I ask you about like to describe like a scene for me and what you would do, I kind of want to see how you integrate into the neighborhood and what that connection is, whether it be taking a walk down the street and that radius of how far you would go or something like that.
I do walk the neighborhoods, and part of that is because of the position I'm in, employment wise. I will walk the neighborhoods. I'll drive the neighborhoods. That may be daily. It may be a couple times a week, but just to get a sense of different areas, because there are differences in the neighborhood. Some areas have a higher rate of home ownership, so you can see how people are caring for their property. Then you have other areas that may have other issues. There may not, there might be some houses or properties that are boarded up, blighted, and those are the properties we try to work on. For my daily routine, I usually just get up and have a good cup of coffee in the morning and stand out on my front porch, and I can see Sherman Boulevard and just kind of get some ideas of what's coming up next. What's the next trend? What do we need to really work on? I walk down to Washington Park. I participate in Washington Park Wednesdays and visit that event. I utilize the businesses that are in this community, whether it's Sherman Perk Coffee Shop or Great Impressions if I need some printing done, the Pasty Shop for lunch. So it's a lot of things that I actually do, but I'm about 4 minutes from work, and that's always a good thing. So usually Monday through Friday, I get up in the morning and I'm here at work.
And so you said that you set out in the morning and kind of visualize what's next. What do you see that being?
I see Sherman Park, or what I would like for Sherman Park is to be a safe neighborhood. I feel safe, but other people may not feel safe. It needs to be something that's consistent across the board. I want people to feel safe in the neighborhood. We have beautiful homes here. I would love to attract people back into the neighborhood. One of the things that I'd like to do is work with the city and work with banks so that we could do some home ownership programs where people can actually find out how they can buy a home in this area. I would love to see people not speed down the street. That's one thing I see in the morning when I'm sitting on the porch. So that's probably what I see.
So I'm going to take that back to, you mentioned that you would like to work with the city and banks. But then before you also mentioned investors and maybe targeting Sherman Park. First, I want to know what parts of Sherman Park that they target, because you said that there is differences in the neighborhood. And also, what do you think, what are your biggest fears and aspirations that might come from those investors?
Well, I don't have a problem with people investing, um, but I do have a problem when you're an investor, you don't live in this community, and you don't screen your tenants, you don't take care of your property. Those are probably the things that I have a bigger problem with. I have no problem with investors who take care of their homes, who screen their tenants, and if there's problems, they try to resolve them. They have to be proactive in resolving problems.
And when you say screen tenants, like what would that consist of? Like,
I guess I'm trying to understand your question. What do you mean by that?
like what would be?
What's the screening process?
Yeah, what's the screening process, and what should they be looking for to decide whether or not this person should be able to, occupy whatever space?
Okay, so I'm also a landlord because the house I bought in 2000 I still own. So, but for me, as a landlord, I screen my tenants and I do a thorough screening. I do background checks, I do credit checks. I drive past their house that they're currently living at to see what's going on in front of their house or behind the house. I also ask tenants or prospective tenants if I can visit their home so I can see how they live in their home. I'm not quite sure that other landlords do that. I've lived in the house that I originally purchased for a good number of years. I got a chance to know my neighbors very well. So for me, I'm very concerned, not that I want to just get rent money, but I want my neighbors to be comfortable with the tenants that live there, because they will call me too if there's any problems. So that's part of the screening process, along with filling out an application too.
And so I'm going to take it a little bit further back. Before you moved into the neighborhood in 2000, did you have any idea of what Sherman Park was?
Mm-hmm.
And then what was that, how has it changed or maybe stayed the same after being in a neighborhood and living here?
When I originally purchased my home in 2000, there weren't as many investment properties. So over the last 18 years, that has changed considerably.
And could you describe what that is?
What do you mean, describe?
Like what is an investment property? Is that when somebody buys something but they don't live here, or what is?
Well, from what I'm seeing, and the thing is, I see Sherman Park from different angles, based on the position that I'm in now, because I get to see what our statistics look like. What is the percentage of homes that are owner occupied versus homes that are investment properties. And so right now we are probably about 55% rental properties and about 45% owner occupied. So the question that I ask, and I will be asking, is what is the future of our neighborhood? Because if you continue to let it become a place where people are investing in and they're not here and they're not vested in this community, a lot of the homeowners will move. That's just how it goes. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Because a lot of people describe it as homeowner and then renter, but you said investment property, so that's another way to look at it, and I feel like that was more of a business perspective.
It is. It's a business perspective, and like I said, I have no problem with people investing. And people could probably say, well, you're an investor too because you have a rental property. I take very good care of my property, and I have very good tenants and long-term tenants. So, like I said, I look at this from a couple different angles. I have no problem with people investing. People have an opportunity to make money. But along with that comes some civic responsibility. I also live in Sherman Park. I've had the opportunity to look at who owns property. Some people don't even live in the state. So I'm not quite sure how many times they're visiting their properties, if they're picking up trash when they come to their properties, if they're driving by the properties to see what their tenants are doing. So that's a huge concern for me.
And so with that perspective of having this organizing business mindset and also living in a community, what kind of advice or knowledge do you share with the residents or the people who you work with, and how do you kind of get people to see that it's important to take care of it, whether or not you're a renter or an absentee landlord? Or how do you kind of give that information out to people from these multiple perspectives that you have?
Well, as a homeowner, and even as a landlord, I tell people all the time to utilize the city services. Whether that's calling the Department of Neighborhood Services if you have someone who has trash or a car parked in their backyard, because it's against the law to park your car in the backyard unless it's paved. You can't just park on your grass. So if you have issues like that, I always encourage people to call the city to help resolve some of those problems. And I do the same thing myself. If I have any issues with people, neighbors, I call the city myself. I think the city of Milwaukee has great services, and they're responsive. Whether it's picking up trash, if you need to call the Department of Public Works, they come out, they'll pick up the trash or whatever. But I think people need to utilize those services. So that's what I encourage people to do.
Yeah, and would you, because I know before you mentioned the city could be an asset to the neighborhood, but a lot of people are afraid to call because of retaliation. What do you think that you could do as a resident and as also a community asset working here at the Sherman Park Association to kind of combat and mediate that fear that people have?
Well, when we have community meetings, we always tell people, use the services. We can't preach that enough. But I haven't figured out how to take away fear. I haven't figured out how to address that. I've always, though, believed that if there are issues, if there's a number of people, that it helps to resolve the problem. Because if everybody's mad about somebody on their block who's wreaking havoc on the block, everybody on the block should call and address that situation. Whether it's contacting the landlord, having the city contact the landlord, the property becoming a nuisance property, then the landlord has those responsibilities, because there's expensive tickets that come along with a home becoming a nuisance property. So I believe that people should just call. Either you live in fear or you are in a home that you hate what's going on outside. So those are really your only choices. So how do you address it? And mine is call. Call the city, call the police, call who you need to call. So.
Interesting. That kind of made me think about when you said nuisance properties, it made me think of the foreclosed homes that are located throughout Sherman Park. First, I want to just get your perspective of that, the presence of these homes.
Well, it's in our neighborhood and it's in some other neighborhoods. A lot of the houses that may be boarded up are a result of the 2008 mortgage debacle. So that's part of it, but that's also some predatory lending on some other people's part. It's also a product of redlining. It's also a product of people not being prepared either to know that if you're getting a mortgage and in 5 years your payment is going to triple, or double, sometimes people just didn't understand that process. So, those are my thoughts, I guess.
And how do you think has that affected the way that you live within the neighborhood, or how your neighbors view the neighborhood at all in any way?
Ask that question again.
Has the presence of foreclosed homes in the neighborhood impacted the way that people move or live in the neighborhood, including yourself?
Not really, for me. As I stated before, when I first moved here, I bought a house on Scranton. And I lived there for probably 10 years. And the person next door to me, her house was going into foreclosure. So rather than letting it just go into foreclosure, she decided, let me not accuse people, but the house anyway caught on fire the day before she was supposed to go to court. So the house sat vacant for 3 years. It was boarded up. Water was coming out the basement windows. So I had to really be diligent about calling the city. Whether it was the Department of Public Works, people dumped trash in her yard, or people took the boards off the house, went in the house, lived in the house. So I had to constantly call the city. It took 3 years before someone actually bought the house and flipped it. And they sold it. Now there's a family in the house. So that's kind of the process. It's unfortunate that it had to sit vacant for 3 years next door to me. So, but like I said, I had to be diligent about trying to get this resolved for me. If I'm taking out the trash in my yard, I didn't want to see some strange people in the yard. That was a little frightening. So I called the police on a regular basis. And that's how I kind of resolved that issue, though. But luckily enough, it was purchased. It wasn't an investor. It was a family that actually moved into the home. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it
okay.
definitely did. And so now I want to take it a little bit, relate that back to something you said before, and I kind of touched on, not foreclosures, but just the houses in general. When you will ride around and see the houses that might need work, and you said, we try to work on these.
Mm-hmm.
What type of work do you do?
So every year in the spring, Sherman Park Community Association does a housing survey. So we go to the neighborhood and we look at the homes. We check to see if the shingles are missing, if the house needs to be painted, if the porch is falling apart, if there are railings on the porch, if the sidewalk is in bad shape, fence falling down. So we mark all of that stuff. Excuse me. And from there, we do a letter to the homeowner, letting them know that we did the survey and these are the resources that are available. So that's what we do too.
Nice. And then when you were describing kind of the process that could lead to foreclosure, you mentioned that sometimes people get into a situation now knowing that in a couple of years, if this price that they thought might double or triple.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also mentioned one of the solutions that you have for the neighborhood was homeownership programs.
Mm-hmm.
So what would those homeownership programs consist of? Like what type of classes or seminars would happen?
Well, the banks provide, like Associated Bank, U.S. Bank, Johnson Bank, and I'm not advocating for those banks, but they do first-time home buying seminars. So they can let people know what their credit needs to be, what their cash money situation should be in the bank when you're purchasing a home, what to expect when you're buying a home. Because when you purchase a home, you can't call the landlord and say, hey, can you come fix my toilet? That becomes your responsibility. And how do you get the resources to fix your home, which may mean you can rent tools or things like that, just to help your own situation.
And I'll take it back to your individual house. Could you first of all describe what your house is now? I know you talked about you really liked how it was historic and it was large. Could
Okay.
you maybe describe it a little bit more so we can get an idea of what it is to live in that house?
Okay. I think I mentioned the house is built in 1923. It is the original, I want to say his first name was George Tews, was the original owner. That house was purchased from one of our board members who passed away. He owned the house, and the house was actually in probate when he passed away. And the attorney who was handling the probate, she was saying, "Oh, I have an investor that might," and I was just like, "I can't do the investors anymore." So that was like my initial reaction to purchasing the home, because I was living across the street, and it was, at that point it was like, I'm done, and I needed to not let that happen, at least where I could control it. But my house is about 3,000 square feet. It has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, basement, an office space. But it has hardwood floors. It has all the old world charm. The tiger oak floors, paneled woodwork in the dining room, and built-in china cabinets. I love the house. It's got a huge porch, a built-in bar with a copper lining in the basement. Just things you don't see anymore. Yeah, this is a great house.
And what's your favorite thing about the house?
Favorite thing about the house? Wow. That has a 3-car garage. It's brick. The whole house is brick. It has the Spanish tile roofs, tiles on it. And interestingly enough, the house is extremely cool. It's not a hot house, and I think that's due to the trees and probably the architecture of the house.
Could you maybe go through one of your favorite memories that you remember having in a house?
In that house, or
in another house in Sherman Park? Just a memory that stands out to you.
Oh, well, my first house, I raised my son in my first house. And we're still entrenched in that neighborhood, still stay in contact with the neighbors. He's still good friends with the little boy that he grew up with. They're the same age, they have the same name, but they're still very good friends. Yeah, so we got good memories about our neighborhood. Yeah.
And was that not Sherman Park?
It's still in Sherman Park.
That was the first house, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So how do you keep connection with your neighbors, and what kind of things do you guys do together?
Well, so the house I'm currently living in, do you remember Jeff, this guy right here on the wall?
Yeah.
Okay. You remember him?
I never met him.
Okay.
I interviewed him. Well, my
Okay.
partner interviewed him last year.
Okay. So that's the house I purchased. I purchased his house. And as I was saying, I was living right across the street. My boyfriend and I were living. See, I don't want this on here. But anyway, the house that I'm in now is Jeff's house. But the people around me, I know them. And once I moved into the neighborhood, I realized I know a whole lot of people in the neighborhood. And the relationships run deep because there's people in the neighborhood. The lady that lives across the street from me, she and I went to middle school together. So we've known each other about 40 years. People around the corner, I knew them from church growing up. So, some of the relationships are old relationships, It just so happens that they live on my block or across the street. Another lady across the street from me, very good friends with my mom. I've probably known her since I was 5. So, but we spend time together. One of our neighbors has a pool in her yard, so we go and hang out in her yard when it's hot. We plant, share flowers, just chat, talk about things that are going on in the neighborhood or things that could be better. So.
And what are some of those things?
That could be better?
Yeah.
I think I described those, as it relates to having more investment properties than having more homeowners. So I think if we can turn that around, it would be better off for the whole neighborhood.
And why do you think that would make what do you think the difference would be if it was more homeowners than an investment?
Well, a couple of things would happen. People would stay longer. People typically don't buy houses and move the next year. They stay in place. They usually raise their children there. They typically would have a different sense of pride because it's something that they purchase with their own hard-earned money, and they want to see it thrive. They want to do well by their home.
And then I'm just curious to know, we have this thing in the field school where we're curious about corner houses now because
I'm on the corner too.
A thing, I know. So could you maybe describe, and I also know that you know your neighbors across the ways, so maybe could you describe what that is, like the significance of having a corner house and being connected in that way?
The significance of owning a corner house.
Or is there a significance?
Well, you have more snow to shovel. More leaves to rake. It also, sometimes when you're on a corner, when people are driving through, they throw trash out, so you end up having to clean that up. But also the benefit of being on a corner, you can see everything down the block in both directions easily.
So it's like a responsibility, but also it has benefits to it.
Yeah, I think the corner houses are like the anchor houses for the block.
I think that's all of the questions that I have. But I do want to review my notes, so I do want to ask if you would be willing to maybe do a follow-up if necessary. You don't have to agree right now. I'm just trying to get it on. No.
Sure. Do it.
I had one other question.
Yes.
Just as a follow-up. You kind of mentioned some of the businesses that you go to in the community, and I know because I'm familiar with Sherman Park, and then I haven't been to the pasty place.
That's across the street.
I know.
Right across the street.
And I heard you guys went down. I think yesterday when I saw you, you guys.
We were going to the pasty shop. Yep.
Can you kind of just tell me which of those is your favorite place to visit, and then what's the atmosphere like? Can you describe, being somebody that I didn't get to go to the pasty shop, but if you're gonna tell somebody, what do you love about going to that location, or your place that you like to visit over and over?
Well, I'd never say publicly what my favorite place would be,
but in general.
I love going to Sherman Park Coffee Shop because it has a different vibe. I love the old architecture of that building. And it was around the corner from my house on Scranton. So my son went there. You know, we'd go there in the morning for coffee or hot chocolate when we were on our way to school, when I was dropping him off at school. But Sherman Park is also a great gathering place because you can have meetings there. And when I lived in my other house, I did host neighborhood meetings, and they would typically be there at Sherman Park. So, but I love the pasty shop too, and I love Great Impressions too. So,
What do you like about the pasty shop? Other than
they're like an
the good
anchor.
food?
They're also have been in business for, I can't even tell you, but I was probably a kid. And they've been around for a long time, and people have, you know, experienced a pasty, and then, you know, their kids are growing up eating pasties. You know, it's kind of a generational thing because they've been in the neighborhood for so long. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
I'm processing everything. Yep.
Okay. Do you have anything that you want to add that you think we didn't discuss or didn't discuss enough?
I do have a question.
What's your question?
So, you do all that you do. What gives you the most sense of hope that what you're doing is it's going somewhere, and that you're always moving forward? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? I'm a firm believer of people verbalizing and visualizing what they want and what they need to make themselves whole and complete. And I do believe that if the homeowners in the neighborhood and even the investors in the neighborhood, if they want this to be a better neighborhood, they'll do what it takes for the neighborhood to be a great neighborhood. Does that make sense?
You have that trust. Is it?
Yeah, I trust that people would want this to be better if that's their hope. If they want it to be better, I think people will do what it takes for it to be better. I think people just need to be knowledgeable, informed, unafraid to make that happen. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
It was a good question. It's an excellent question. But I believe in the power of people.
One last thing. Is there anything that, as we're creating this multitude of information that we're gathering, is there something that you'd like people to know? Anyone who might have access to what we're doing and see, these stories, and here's your story. Is there something that we didn't mention? Just something that you'd like to be known?
I think the thing I'd love most for the world to know is that come to Sherman Park. We have great housing stock. Come as a family. I think that people can turn it around. I think people have to be focused. And I believe that if people want change, they have to be the change. Does that answer you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, certainly.
Okay.
That's great. Is there anything else that you want?
Mm-mm.
No? Okay. Well, this is, I'm Tiana Cooksey. You're interviewing Mabel Lamb. And, it's June 13th. It is now 4:05. And this concludes the interview.
Are we just